Welcome back, everybody. For our deep dive today, we're looking into the Franco family
Okay.
of the 8 Passengers
Yeah.
YouTube channel.
Yeah. I've been following this one.
Yeah, this case has really captured a lot of attention, and I think it's really captivated people because of this idea that you have this picture-perfect family online,
Right.
and then behind the scenes, allegations of abuse and really disturbing things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really speaks to the curated nature of a lot of what we see online, right? It's like we get this very specific presentation,
Yeah,
and it's hard to know what's really going on.
exactly, and that's what makes this case, I think, so fascinating to unpack. And we have a lot of different sources that we're going to be looking at today.
Okay.
Excerpts from podcasts, news articles, firsthand accounts.
Wow.
Really trying to piece together, what happened here and what we can learn from it.
Yeah, I think that's important
Yeah.
with these kinds of cases.
So let's start, I guess, at the beginning with the Franke family's YouTube channel, 8 Passengers.
Right.
Initially they gained a following just by showcasing their daily life. Big family, 6 kids.
Yeah.
Showing the school runs, the meal preps, the sibling dynamics.
Yeah, it seemed very relatable to a lot of people.
It did. And I think to a lot of viewers, it felt very aspirational.
Right.
This idea of this.
The big happy family.
Yeah, the big happy family.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I think makes their later content so unsettling.
Right.
Because as the channel grew,
Yeah.
their parenting style, in particular Ruby Frank's, started to shift towards stricter discipline.
Yeah, and a lot of that was showcased on camera.
Very much so.
Which is...
And that's where I think a lot of people started to raise concerns.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we see instances of food being withheld as punishment.
Right.
Children being isolated from their siblings.
Yeah.
Even one of the sons being sent to a wilderness camp.
Right. Which was very controversial.
Yes, very controversial.
Yes.
And these actions led to, many viewers reporting the family to Child Protective Services.
Multiple times.
Multiple times.
Over the years.
Over the years.
Yeah.
And yet it seems those reports didn't necessarily lead to immediate intervention.
Right.
And it wasn't until their son's escape that the severity of the situation really came to light.
And that's really unfortunate because it underscores a real issue with our child protection systems, right?
Yes.
They often rely on very clear and immediate evidence of physical abuse.
Yeah.
But when it comes to these more nuanced cases of emotional manipulation or neglect, it can be much harder to detect and act on.
Yeah, and that's where I think this case takes an even darker turn.
Right.
Because we introduced this figure of Jody Hildebrandt.
Yes.
A self-proclaimed therapist who initially entered the picture as a counselor for the family. She founded a program called Connections, which on the surface, seemed to focus on personal growth, building healthy relationships.
Right. It sounds pretty innocuous.
It does.
Only the surface.
It does.
Yeah.
But when you start to kind of peel back the layers of Connections and really look into it.
Yeah. What did you find?
There are some really alarming concepts that emerge.
Okay.
Hildebrandt's teachings revolve around this idea of what she calls distortion.
Distortion.
Yes.
Okay.
And essentially it's anything that she deems negative or untrue.
Okay.
Her program aimed to help people live in truth, but it's truth as defined by
her principles.
By her principles, exactly.
Right.
And it seems that Ruby Franke became very deeply enmeshed in these teachings.
Okay, so how did that manifest?
Well, you start to see her language and her actions towards her children reflecting this concept of distortion.
Okay.
She even publicly defended her controversial parenting choices as aligning with Hildebrandt's principles.
Wow, so it's like Hildebrandt's ideology became a justification for her actions.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this is where the potential for manipulation, I think, becomes really apparent.
Right.
Because Hildebrandt's teachings seem to encourage isolation from anyone who questions or disagrees with her truth.
Okay, so it creates this kind of us versus them mentality.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is particularly evident in Ruby's separation from her husband, Kevin.
Right.
And his subsequent absence from the children's lives.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of speculation about Kevin's role in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the sources we have suggest that Hildebrandt actually actively encouraged the separation.
Oh, wow.
portraying Kevin as being stuck in distortion.
So again, she's using her ideology
Yes.
to manipulate the situation.
Exactly. And this us versus them mentality
Right.
it's a hallmark of manipulative relationships in cults.
It's a way to control information.
Yes.
And isolate people.
Exactly. You're cutting people off. From their support systems, you're controlling the narrative.
It's very effective.
It is, and it's frightening.
It is.
And it's worth noting, we've talked about other cases
Right.
involving cults and coercive control.
Yeah, like Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
Exactly. And we see this same pattern of isolating individuals from their support systems.
Right.
In those cases as well.
It's a common tactic.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's really chilling to see how it plays out in these different situations.
Absolutely.
And to add another layer of complexity here,
Okay.
we have these disturbing accounts from former clients of Jodi Hildebrandt
Oh, wow.
and even her niece,
Okay.
alleging a history of manipulation, emotional abuse, and control.
And this goes back how far?
Decades.
Decades. Wow.
Yeah.
Huh?
And these firsthand testimonies are so crucial
Sure.
because they establish a pattern of behavior.
Right. It's not just an isolated incident.
Exactly.
It's like this recurring theme, which becomes even more alarming when you consider the allegations against Ruby Frank.
Exactly. And the potential impact on her children.
Right. And that's really what makes this case so disturbing.
It is.
Yeah.
It's the potential harm to these kids
Absolutely.
that really, I think, is at the heart of everyone's concern.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that, these kids are real people.
They are.
They're not just characters in this online drama.
Exactly.
And they deserve our compassion and our protection.
Absolutely.
You know what's really troubling about this whole thing?
What's that?
Hildebrandt was a licensed therapist.
Oh, wow.
Before all of this.
Before her involvement with the Frank family.
Yes, exactly. And, she even had this position of authority within the LDS church.
Okay.
She was often recommended to families seeking counseling.
It's unsettling
It is.
to think that someone in a position of trust, like that a licensed professional could engage in such harmful practices.
Yeah. Right. And it makes you question how someone like that could operate for so long.
Yeah.
Without being held accountable.
Without anyone noticing the red flags.
Exactly. And the sources we have indicate that her license was eventually suspended.
Oh, really?
Yes, due to a very serious ethical violation.
What was that?
She disclosed a client's confidential information.
No way.
Yes, to church officials.
Wow, a therapist breaching confidentiality.
I know.
That's a fundamental breach of trust.
It is. It's a huge deal.
It makes you wonder how many others might have been harmed or felt unable to speak out against her.
Right, because of her standing in the community.
Exactly, because of her position.
Yeah.
And the fact that she shared this information with church officials
Right.
adds another layer of complexity to this.
It does.
It raises questions about the role of religious institutions in these situations.
Right. And the potential for individuals to exploit those systems.
For their own personal gain.
Exactly.
Wow. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. It's a very complicated situation. And, it really highlights the need for critical thinking.
Yeah.
Even within trusted communities.
You can't just blindly trust someone.
Right. You have to be willing to question authority.
To protect the vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And speaking of vulnerable,
Yes.
let's shift our focus back to the Franco family.
Okay.
Things took a turn for the worse when Ruby and Jodi decided to launch this new program called Connections.
Okay, so this was their joint venture.
Yes.
Okay.
And Connections seemed to just amplify all the concerning principles from Hildebrandt's earlier program.
Right, so even more emphasis on this idea of truth.
Yes.
As defined by Hildebrandt.
Exactly, and complete obedience to her teachings.
Wow.
And the impact on the Franke children just becomes even more apparent.
So
Well, we see instances where they were publicly shamed for not conforming to the Connections principle.
Oh, wow.
They were portrayed as being resistant to truth and in need of correction.
So it's like this constant labeling and judgment.
And this is where that concept of distortion becomes so dangerous.
Because it's a catch-all term for anything that deviates from Hildebrandt's teachings.
It allows for a really scary level of control.
It does, because anyone who disagrees
can be dismissed
as being in distortion.
It's like you're silencing any form of dissent.
Exactly. You're shutting down any critical thinking.
And this control extended beyond the children, too.
Oh, really? So who else was affected by this?
Former clients of Connections.
Okay.
And even Hildebrandt's own niece have come forward with these really harrowing accounts of manipulation and abuse.
Wow, her own niece.
Yes,
That's really disturbing.
it is, and her niece's testimony is especially chilling.
What did she say?
She describes being subjected to emotional and physical abuse by Hildebrand, who accused her of all these fabricated wrongdoings, isolated her from her family,
Wow.
and even used duct tape to silence her.
That's horrifying.
To think that a young girl seeking guidance and support from her aunt could be subjected to that kind of treatment.
It's just awful.
It's a testament to the insidious nature of emotional abuse.
Right, because it often leaves these invisible scars
Yes.
that can really impact a person's sense of self and their ability to form healthy relationships.
It's so damaging.
It is.
And then these accounts from former clients and Hildebrand's niece
Yeah.
really create this disturbing parallel to the allegations against Ruby Frank.
Right. They suggest a pattern of behavior
They do.
that goes beyond strict parenting
Yes.
and ventures into the realm of emotional abuse.
And it's a reminder that abuse can take many forms.
Right. It's not always physical.
It's not always visible.
Exactly.
Emotional manipulation could be just as damaging,
If not more so.
especially when it comes from someone in a position of authority or trust.
Right, because you're more likely to believe them
Exactly.
and you're less likely to question them.
And you're more likely to blame yourself
Right.
when things go wrong.
And these revelations about Hildebrandt's past,
Yeah.
her methods and the allegations from others really cast this dark shadow
That would do.
over everything we thought we knew about the Franke family.
Exactly. It forces us to re-examine their online persona.
Right.
And acknowledge that something much more sinister
Yeah.
could have been happening.
Beneath the surface.
Yes. And as the legal proceedings against Ruby Frank and Jody Hildebrand unfold,
Right.
we're left with a lot of disturbing questions.
Like what?
What about the Franke children?
Yeah. What happens to them now?
What will their future hold?
Right.
What role did Kevin Franke, the father, play in all of this?
Yeah. What was his level of involvement?
And these are questions that we'll delve into further
Okay.
as we continue our deep dive into this really complex and unsettling case.
Yeah. I'm interested to hear what else you've uncovered.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
our focus really turns to the Franke children
Right. What about those kids?
and their future.
Yeah. What happens now?
They've been removed from the home, and they're currently in state custody.
Okay.
But the question remains, what kind of long-term impact will this experience have on them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's hard to say for sure. Obviously, every child is different.
Right.
But we can look at, research on childhood trauma to get some insights.
And what does that research tell us?
Well, the Franke children, they've endured this combination of emotional neglect, psychological manipulation,
Right.
and potential physical abuse.
Right.
And this can lead to a variety of long-term effects.
Such as?
Anxiety, depression, difficulty forming healthy attachments,
Okay.
even physical health problems.
It's heartbreaking
It
to
is.
think about what these kids have gone through,
Yeah.
especially at such a young age.
They were robbed of a normal childhood.
They were.
They were subjected to this environment of fear and control.
And that's got to have a lasting impact.
Absolutely.
And speaking of support, what kind of resources are available to children like the Frank siblings who have endured these extreme circumstances?
Well, thankfully, there are organizations out there
Yeah.
that are dedicated to helping children who have experienced abuse and neglect.
Yeah.
They offer a range of services, therapy, counseling, support groups, even legal advocacy.
Okay.
The goal is to provide a safe and nurturing environment
Yeah.
where these children can begin to heal and rebuild their lives.
That's good to hear.
It is.
But it also makes you wonder, why did it take their son's escape
Right.
for the system to finally intervene?
Exactly. Were there missed opportunities along the way?
Yes. Could more have been
To
done
protect these kids
sooner?
before things escalated.
Yeah, and those are really difficult questions.
They are, and they highlight the complexities of these cases,
Mm.
Particularly those involving emotional abuse and neglect.
Right, because it's not always as clear-cut.
Right. It can be very challenging to gather enough evidence to warrant intervention.
Especially when a family is presenting this carefully curated image to the world.
Exactly. It's really tough.
And that brings us to the legal ramifications for
Right.
those involved.
Yeah. What's happening on that front?
So Ruby Frank and Jody Hildebrand are currently facing 6 felony counts each
Wow.
of aggravated child abuse.
Okay. So those are serious charges.
Very serious charges.
Yeah.
And if convicted, they could face significant prison time.
Right.
But the legal process is likely to be lengthy and complex.
It usually is in these kinds of cases.
Yes. And what about Kevin Franke?
Right, the father.
You know, as we've discussed, his role in all of this remains somewhat ambiguous.
Yeah, he hasn't been charged with any crimes.
Right.
But there's a lot of public scrutiny.
There is, some might argue that he was a victim of Hildebrandt's manipulation.
Right.
While others question his level of awareness.
Yeah, and his accountability.
You know, for what was happening to his children.
Right. Was he complicit?
It's a really complex situation.
It is, and the legal system will have to sort it out.
Determine if his actions or inaction constitute neglect.
Or any other form of culpability.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is.
And this case has also sparked this wider conversation about the ethics of family vlogging.
Yeah.
You know, and the potential for exploitation of children.
Yeah, when you're putting your whole life online.
In pursuit of online fame and profit.
It's a slippery slope.
It is.
Yeah.
And the Franke family's story really serves as a stark reminder of the dark side of social media.
Absolutely.
It highlights the need for greater awareness, critical thinking, and potentially even stricter regulations.
To protect children.
To protect children in the online world.
Yeah.
It's a difficult balance to strike.
It is.
You know, because on one hand, we want to celebrate families who share their lives and connect with others online.
Right. There's nothing wrong with that inherently.
Exactly.
But we have to be mindful.
But on the other hand, we need to be vigilant
about
protecting children.
Absolutely. And exploitation.
And making sure their well-being is prioritized.
Above all else.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
It is.
And this case really forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions.
Like what?
About our own consumption of online content.
Okay.
Are we, as viewers, complicit?
Ooh, that's a good question.
In the exploitation of children.
Yeah.
When we support channels that prioritize views and profit.
Over the well-being of their kids.
Yeah. It's a tough question.
It is.
But it's one that we need to ask ourselves.
Absolutely. We have to be more mindful.
We do.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the most important takeaway from this deep dive is that we all have a role to play.
In protecting children.
Yeah. Yes. We need to be more discerning about the content we consume, more aware of the potential for abuse.
Yeah.
More willing to speak up.
When we see something that seems wrong.
Exactly. If something feels off.
Trust your gut.
Trust your gut, say something.
Yeah.
The Franke family case is a tragedy.
It is on many levels.
Yeah.
But it also presents an opportunity.
For growth and change.
For growth and change for all of us.
Right. We can learn from this.
We can learn from this and hopefully create a world where all children are safe, nurtured, and empowered to thrive.
That's a great goal.
It is. And thank you all for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a really insightful conversation.
It has. And we'll see you next time.
Okay, sounds good.